Welcome to Ask SME Anything. Your chance to ask the ITProTV subject matter experts questions live. Here's your host, Don Pizzette.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Ask SME Anything, the show brought to you by ITProTV, where you, the viewer, get a chance to ask questions of our subject matter experts. We, have a great staff around here that is constantly filming new content each and every single day, available in the ITProTV library. But watching a video is kind of a one-way thing. You're receiving information, but you get questions and you want answers. That's what we're here to do for you. So, here in studio with me today, I've got Mr. Mike Roderick. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Hey, you're welcome. Sorry, thanks, Don. Thanks for having me here as I trip over my chair here trying to sit up. How's it going today?
Hey, I remember when I learned English, it took a while to get used to it. Mike, while not our English master around here, is our resident Windows Server expert, and you've been on the show a few times now,
Yep.
So most everybody should be familiar with you.
Hopefully.
So if you have questions that fall into that Microsoft realm, this is a great time to ask them. Now, I don't want to pigeonhole Mike here because he actually does have a background in a number of different technologies, ranging from security and even a bit of Linux. And I've seen you write some crazy Excel macros,
I do like to dabble in a little VBA back in the day.
which is completely outside of my scope. I have no idea how that stuff works. But if you have questions, be sure to throw them at us. And let me just remind you, if this is your first time tuning in, how can you ask those questions? We actually have two different ways to go about it. The easiest way is jump on good old Twitter. Throw out your question there and use hashtag AskSMeAnything. Our social media team monitors for that hashtag. They pick up the questions, they sort them, and they throw them into the shows just like this one. We actually have somebody watching live right now. So if you are watching this show live, tweet with that hashtag. We'll see it. Question gets integrated into the show, and we answer it, assuming we have time. And that's what brings up our second method. If you're an ITProTV subscriber, you can cut to the front of the line, jump over to the ITProTV site, and go to the Q&A forums. If you post your questions there, we scoop those up all throughout the week as well, and we make sure we get to those first. We want to make sure that everybody gets answered. We do try to get to everyone's question, but in all fairness, that is how we prioritize. We play favorites. So
Sometimes.
all right. Well, Mike, I think that's probably enough lead in here. Let's jump right into our questions. We have some good ones that came in this week. Just kind of all over the place, but very Microsofty. The first one is coming from Megan out there in the. Actually, this one might have come from internal, but it is: what is the difference between the versions of Windows Server 2016? And I mean, this is a question we could apply to almost any Microsoft product. Maybe we start simple. Like, what are the different editions these days, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. Always a lot of different, what they call SKUs when it comes to the different operating systems, right? But they've actually slimmed it down a little bit. It's not like it used to be. There were even more. With Server 2016, there's three server SKUs that they have. There's Essentials, there's Standard, and there's Data Center. So we're limited to just those three. And really, Essentials is a very niche market. If you have a very small IT shop, this might be something where I think you're limited to 25 users, 50 computers, and it's kind of a one server, very similar to what we used to use, the small business server.
A small business server, a ton of people use that. And I remember when the Essentials edition was announced, and a lot of people were upset because when you bought small business server, what did you get? You got Exchange and SharePoint. I think you also. I mean, you got a number of tools, and even some tools that were only available inside of small business server that weren't available if you got regular server. So it was really interesting. The Essentials edition, though, it doesn't really have anything special, right? It's just crippled.
Yeah, it is. It's very limited. It's like I said, as far as how many users you can have, how many servers you can connect to it. It is tied into Azure. I have not played too much with it because we focus primarily on Standard and Data Center when working for our certifications. But it is limited. It's I'm trying to think. Like I said, 25 users is one of the big things. So if you got a very small shop, that might be something you could price-wise. It's a lot less expensive. But it is, as you said, limited. And as soon as you move beyond that, you're going to need more licensing. You're going to need to spend a little more money.
And maybe that's its big shining feature is price tag,
yes.
Right? I was Googling while you were talking, a standard server cal. So a cal is a client access license, but a standard server cal or actually, hang on, now that's a whole new can of
Yes,
worms, right? So let's put the cows out of the picture. Just the base price for buying the disc for Essentials is $501. Standard is $882. So you could save $382. That's a decent chunk.
And you don't need any cows, right? So it's your 25 users, that's already included in the price. Whereas with standard, you're paying $882 ballpark, but you still need to have client access licenses for each node that's going to be connecting.
Yeah, and that's something that a lot of people don't learn, like in our training, right? Where we create videos and we're showing, here's how you set up a DNS server, here's how you set up a file server, here's how you set up this and that. That at the end of the day, we don't necessarily talk about licensing very much, and those client access licenses are pretty important. Like just buying a server license isn't enough. I think it includes 5?
I believe so.
Is it 5 cows? So if you have 500 people in your network that are all going to be connecting to that server, you've got to have 500 cows that goes along with it. That server becomes significantly more expensive.
It does. It really does. So that's where the big advantage is with that. With a small business that can't afford that, you've got 10 users. You don't need a full-blown server install. Trying to minimize. You don't have IT staff possibly that can take care of that. It's relatively easy. It walks you through the setup. It creates a small domain. There's actually a client that you run on your workstations that'll connect to the Windows Essential server and set everything up, all the connectivity and things like that. So it's very easy for somebody that doesn't have a lot of IT experience or doesn't have an IT staff to maintain that type of server.
All right, so we know there's Essentials, we know there's Standard, and I believe you mentioned Data Center as well. All right, so going back to our original Twitter question, it was like, what's the difference between each of them? Right. So we've talked about Essential. Main difference there is it's cheaper and it's limited to the amount of users that you can have access to. So obviously targeted to small environments. Once we get up to Standard, it's the standard features, I guess, right?
You know, it's actually an interesting, it used to be, if you go back a little ways, you think back to Server 2003, for example, where there was a big difference. If you bought Standard versus Enterprise, what was it that Enterprise was Standard? You couldn't run a certificate authority. You had to have Enterprise for that. There were several things that you could not do with Standard that you needed to spend a little more money and get the Enterprise license. They called it Enterprise back then. It's now Data Center. When you look at Standard versus Data Center in Server 2016, there's actually very few differences as far as like what roles, none of that. Ever since 2008, either version, Standard or Data Center or Enterprise, depending on what it was called at the time, can run all the roles. So there's really no difference there. That used to be an important decision-making, or part of my decision-making process was, what do I plan to do with this server? That's going to determine whether I can get away with buying Standard or I have to pony up a little bit more money and go with that Data Center. So role-wise, no difference. In fact, let's take a look at my screen here. I think I've got it pulled up. We can see a comparison as we go through here. On the left column, I have Server 2016 Standard. On the right, Server 2016 Data Center. And as we go down through here, Don, point out the differences that you see.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same all the way down the line.
Maximum RAM. Can I join a domain? Firewall roles.
Now, I did see a difference on virtualization guests up there, and that's probably one of the main differences between the two platforms.
Yes, and it really is. And let's scroll down to where we get to that. Right here, can be used as a virtualization guest, 2 virtual machines plus 1 Hyper-V host per license. With Data Center, unlimited number of virtual machines plus 1 Hyper-V host license. So what that's saying is if I want to set up a Hyper-V server, right? If I get Standard, my license covers setting up that Hyper-V server. So the physical server is licensed. And then I can run 2 virtual machines on that Hyper-V server without buying any additional licenses. So I'm really getting 3, right? 1 physical and 2 virtual licenses there. With Enterprise, or I should say with Data Center, it's an unlimited number of virtual machines. So you get your license for your host, and then an unlimited number of virtual machines. And depending on what you're going to do, if you're in a highly virtualized environment, you know, that's something that might make a big difference. If you're only going to run 3 or 4 virtual machines, you might find that it's still less expensive to get 2 Standard and not move to Data Center. At some point, there's going to be a tipping point somewhere, though, where, okay, now I need this many virtual machines. It's actually going to be cheaper to go Data Center rather than try to get standard license for all those virtual machines.
Yeah, if you think about it, a standard license is $882, right? And I'm pulling this off of Microsoft's site. A data center license is $6,155, right? So a decent bump up. Let me do some quick background math here.
Times, roughly.
Yeah, but roughly 7 copies. So if I wanted to have a host, well, if I could do standard and I had 2 VMs free, basically, that I could then add up to, I guess, 6 more before I hit the price of data center. So that would be 8 VMs total. So if you have 8 VMs and the host, you can do standard, but that, I guess it would be 1 less, right? So 7 VMs in the host. Once you get to 8, you're at the price of data center. You might as well do data center because every other VM you add after that point is free. Well, free because you paid a ton.
Exactly.
So, you pay $6,200 for data center, and now you can spin up 50 VMs on there, and you don't have to worry about a base license. Now, you still have CALs. You're always going to have CALs, the client access license, but you would start to save money. I did a quick check just to see if there were specific differences. Did you have some?
Yes, if we keep going down this, like as we go through this list, most of these are all the same. Like if you look at the roles, everything is yes, yes on both sides until we get into network controller. And somewhere down here, we should see software-defined networking is going to be another one that's different. But yeah, all of these, again, containers, very similar to the VMs, where with standard, I can get unlimited number of Windows containers, but only 2 Hyper-V containers, whereas data center, I'm going to get an unlimited number of Hyper-V containers. And then let's see if I can find, here's another host guardian. So this is some extra security that we can apply to our VMs. And somewhere down here, I'll find software-defined storage replica is one, and then somewhere we should see software-defined networking. But really what you're seeing is data center type things, right? If you're running a data center and you're providing virtualization support for other businesses, or you just have a very large environment that's heavily virtualized, data center does have a couple of features that are really geared towards that. Software-defined networking, the host guardian. If I've got multiple tenants sharing a Hyper-V server, if I've got multiple virtual machines from different organizations, I need that separation. That's really where data center comes into play.
All right. So for most people, standard is going to be the right fit. Now, I know on Microsoft's official site, they list essentials, standard, data center. But I know there's a couple other weird ones out there, and the one that's popping into my mind is HVS, right? Which they don't call that Windows Server 2016. They just call it Hyper-V Server. Right. So can you kind of give us a little background on that one? Because that one is a special exception.
It is, and you can obtain it free. It doesn't cost you any money, so it doesn't need a license, and it's basically just a Hyper-V server, right? If you have a physical machine that you want to host virtual machines, rather than buying a standard license, installing the Hyper-V role on it, and then hosting your virtual machines there, which means you have all of the other stuff that comes along with server, right? All of the other roles that you can install, things like that. If you don't need that, if you're just using this for a Hyper-V server, you can go out and you can download the ISO from Microsoft for Hyper-V Server 2016, and that's all it is. It's just Hyper-V. We've got that running on one of our machines here that we use when we do a lot of the labs for our shows. We actually have a machine running Hyper-V Server, and it's great. It's easy to manage. Well, I say it's easy to manage. There's not a lot to it, right? It's just Hyper-V, but it is core, or there's no GUI, right? You don't get the desktop experience with this, which is another reason I think that it's free, but it's very lightweight. The idea is, my focus is the virtual machines. I want to make sure that all of my resources in this physical server, I want to dedicate them to the VMs. I want as few resources as possible being consumed by the host machine. And that's where Hyper-V Server really excels, because it doesn't use a lot of resources, because it doesn't have all that extra stuff. There's far less patching that I have to do. It is a little bit of work as far as managing it. You're going to be doing it remotely, which is pretty common nowadays, so nothing too extravagant there. But I know it's a learning curve, right? When you first set it up, you're like, okay, I need to create a virtual machine. How do I do this? I'm looking at a command prompt. So it takes a little bit there, but you use your remote server admin tools or the new Windows Admin Center, which is all web-based, to work with that machine.
All right, so quite a bit to take in there, several different editions of Windows Server, and easy to see confusion. And it doesn't help that with each version, Microsoft seems to change it a little bit. So, hey, have they announced Windows Server 2019 SKUs yet?
2019 is in beta. I have not seen anything about what the editions are going to be yet.
Yeah, and a lot of times when Microsoft does a beta, they just do like the data center edition as the beta, right? So you get everything, and then they sort it all out later. We'll see where that pans out in the next few months. All right, Mike. Well, let us move on to our next question. And for those of you just tuning in, you can always throw your questions to us using hashtag Ask SME Anything on social media or the ITProTV Q&A forums. So this one is coming from Amanda, and the question is, when working with a Windows Server core install, is it PowerShell or CMD?
CMD most likely, yeah.
So, I have this question myself sometimes where when you fire up a core install, you just mentioned core installs talking about HVS.
Uh-huh.
If I'm at the server console, I hit that power button, it comes up, and I get a command prompt. Is that PowerShell or is it command prompt? I know it used to just be command prompt.
And it's still command prompt. Well, I should say it's most likely command prompt. You really have to pay attention to your prompt, but by default, it's going to be a command prompt, the old CMD interface, and then you'll launch PowerShell from there. In fact, we can take a look. I happen to have a core install here on my machine. So if we look at my screen, this is server core. I just booted it up. This is my logon screen.
And this is what you get when you boot into it.
Yeah. Isn't it exciting? So I'll do my Control-Alt-Delete, and I'll type in my super secret password. Right. And there it is. That is my desktop, right? This is the interface that I have to manage this machine. Many advantages. We've talked about this in some of our shows in our library, of running core without the desktop, without the GUI. Performance-wise, it's a lot less on the resources. Security-wise, a lot less things to patch, a lot less vulnerabilities because I'm losing all of those GUI interfaces, all of those wizards,
applications,
Internet
Explorer, yeah.
Things like that aren't there, which means I don't have to worry about vulnerabilities that pop up. I don't have to worry about patching them because I don't have them, right? So that's fantastic. But it does become a little bit different as far as management goes. We end up managing it remotely, which, I rather enjoy it. And most of the time, honestly, in enterprises, it's what you do anyway. Your servers are not sitting next to you. They're in a server closet somewhere. I don't want to get up and walk over to the closet. I might not have access to it. It might be in the other side of town. It might be in another country. And if you've been in a server closet, they're nice. They're usually very cold, right? And in Florida, that's a plus. But they're also very loud with all the fans and things going. It's not an ideal place. So you do most of your administration remotely anyway. But back to our original question, is it CMD or is it PowerShell? It's actually CMD. I can see up in the top the path here. I can also see this prompt doesn't have a little PS out in front of it. That's a good indicator that this is not PowerShell. And if I try to do something like get-net IP address, try to do a little tab autofill, you see it just sits there and stares at me. It's not really doing anything. So this is command prompt or the old CMD interface. If I want to launch PowerShell, I simply type in PowerShell. See, it doesn't even open up a new window. I don't get my nice blue background, but at the front of the prompt, I can see that little PS, right? And so now if I type in get-net, and you can see the colors are changing, it starts to do the tab autofill and things like that. Up here at the top, I can actually see PowerShell. Now, I will tell you, there are ways that you can, some people don't like this. They're like, well, it looks to me like I'm still in my command prompt or my CMD. To get out of PowerShell, you type exit, you'll see back at the command prompt. If you do your Control-Alt-Delete, like you were going to log off, you can actually go down to Task Manager and a little bit of GUI. There's a couple of things that you'll still see in here, Task Manager being one of them. I could run a new task. I could launch PowerShell, and now I've got a separate PowerShell window rather than my command prompt that looks a little more like PowerShell. So if that bothers you, if you want that blue background, and to really feel like you're in PowerShell, there you go. There are ways to do that. There's also ways that you can modify your registry to have PowerShell be your default shell. You can go into your, I forget, it's one of the Win logon keys in your registry. You can modify that and tell it to use PowerShell as your default shell. And then when you log on, it will be PowerShell instead of the command prompt. So I guess the answer to the question is, it is command prompt by default, but you could change that if you wanted to.
Yeah, I wonder what the behind-the-scenes story is on why it's configured this way. I know when when Windows Server 2008 came out 10 years ago, that was the first one to really give us a core install. And at the time, you couldn't run PowerShell because PowerShell required the .NET framework, and you couldn't install the .NET framework on Server Core at the time. So you were limited to command prompt. And Microsoft said, well, you run the PowerShell on your client, and you can connect to the server and execute that way, which most people weren't used to that model then. Fast forward 10 years to today, yeah, people run PowerShell on their client. They can connect. So we don't even necessarily need the PowerShell on the server, but it certainly does make initial configuration of the server easier, doesn't it?
It really does, and it's I prefer it. And the cool thing about PowerShell is that most of my old command line utilities, tools are aliased in there, so I can still, from PowerShell, I can do everything. I can do my PowerShell commands, and I can do my CMD commands. From CMD, I can only do my CMD commands. So I prefer working in PowerShell. I've been reading a couple interesting articles talking about the death of CMD, because you hear this a lot, like CMD is going away, PowerShell is the administrative tool of choice, that's what we need to be learning, forget about CMD, because it's probably not going to be in the next version of Server. That could be any further from the truth. CMD is not going anywhere, and this is straight from, if you go look at some of the Microsoft blogs, the MVPs out there, they'll tell you there's no way they're getting rid of CMD. The Windows build team relies on CMD. A lot of the scripts and techniques they use to build the Windows versions is all heavily based on CMD. It can't go away. They know that there are thousands of businesses out there that have lots of automation that are based on CMD. So it's not going away. It will be here for a long time, most likely. Does that mean I shouldn't learn PowerShell? Absolutely not. PowerShell is much more powerful, no pun intended, than CMD, right? It's a much cleaner interface. One of the problems they were having with command prompt was if they tried to update something or add a new feature, it ended up breaking something else. I mean, it's been around for decades, a long time.
Yeah.
But they were finding it very difficult to modernize it and bring it into or start adding to it without breaking old stuff. And unfortunately, that old stuff is still relied on by many, many businesses, including Microsoft. So it won't go away. So it's always going to be there. If you've got scripts that are relying on it, it's a good idea to start moving over to PowerShell, but CMD will be there for a little while.
I remember when rumors first started circulating with the release of Windows Millennium Edition. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Where Windows Millennium Edition was the first one where they wouldn't let you get to the command prompt, but it was still there in the background. You just couldn't get to it through normal means. And over the years, Microsoft has kind of like cultivated that rumor, but it's never actually happened. Now they have made changes where they went from like 16-bit to 32-bit, and so you can't run 32-bit command line applications anymore, which is usually a good thing. Yeah. So you get changes like that, but the prompt itself has been around quite some time.
Quite some time, and not going anywhere, so it's safe.
In fact, a lot of us are saying, why don't they pick between CMD and PowerShell? But now we've got the new Bash. Because you can run the Windows subsystem for Linux. It's like a whole nother prompt that's tucked in there. So
we need more shells, Don. You can't have enough shells.
I think there's probably a reasonable limit. All right, Mike. Let's jump on over to our next question. This one is coming from Ryan. The question is, what do you? Oh, we got a PowerShell day today.
Wow.
What do you use to work with PowerShell scripts?
Oh, gosh, all kinds of things. Primarily, though, I will say that I like the actual PowerShell ISE, their integrated scripting environment that's built into Windows. Probably for that very reason, I use it more than anything else. The fact that it is built in, it's always there. It can be a little slow sometimes. I have had days where it just seems to drag its feet. But it's like I said, it's free, it's available, it's there. So that's primarily what I use when I'm working with scripts. I will tell you that I've recently started playing with Visual Studio Code, and there's a PowerShell plugin or add-in for that. It's the interface, it depends really on what you're trying to do. Like if you're strictly PowerShell, if that's all you work with, I think the ISE is perfect. And if you're not familiar with that, I can show you guys real quick. The ISE interface. I'm going to pull up PowerShell, grab the Google Windows ISE. So that's their integrated scripting environment. That's what that stands for. And the nice thing about it is I've got my scripting environment up here on the top, and I have an actual PowerShell terminal down here at the bottom where I can run commands. right? I can get my results, but I can come up here and I can start writing scripts, right? Up here, when I hit enter, it doesn't execute. So this is how we're going to start writing those scripts. But you still get your tab autofill. I might have disabled IntelliSense. That was getting a little bit, it bothered me a little bit when it starts putting this box above where you're typing and trying to predict what you're typing. And for some people, it's a great way to learn PowerShell, to see the available commands. You can also open up a pane over there on the right-hand show. I think it's, I just flipped that all around. Let's change that back. There is a way to open up a window where you can see the actual commands. And you know what? I've turned it off and I've never looked back and I don't know how to turn it back on. Oh, there it is. So here you can see the different commands. So if you're looking for a particular command, you can search and find it. You can actually get information about the command here, almost like running help or get-help from the console. You can start dragging and dropping. I'm sorry, you have to insert from down here. You can insert that command. Oops, let's see, we want to insert it up in our script.
Well, I know this is a really cool feature I use in some of the Azure shows because it's kind of hard to see, but on the right side there, Mike's got the command pulled up, and then it's got all of the command line modifiers right there as fields you can fill out. So when he hit insert, it just threw the basic command in there. But if you populate those little fields and hit insert, it'll do it with all of the command line modifiers. And you know, some PowerShell commands can be a little long. Mike, I've watched some of your Windows deployment shows, right? And, and those, they wrap around the screen 4 times.
Yes.
This makes it a lot easier because you type that stuff in. And
especially if you're just learning. You know, what you'll find is that you might, if you've been doing this for a while, you might find that this is you know, not too much trouble, but just unnecessary. But as you're learning and as you're getting started, it really is a great way to remind yourself what parameters are required, what the heck the parameters are, things like that. So I love the ISE. I mean, you can write PowerShell in Notepad. You don't have to have something like this, but what's going to happen then is in Notepad, it doesn't know the syntax. So there is no, here, let me help you with this command. There is no, that's not a valid command, or, you know, giving you any type of errors or any feedback. You won't know until you try to run the script whether or not you've made any errors, typos, and things like that. So I definitely like the ISE. The other one, like I said, Visual Studio Code. Relatively new. It's been out for a little while from Microsoft. This one, as I said, has a PowerShell plugin that you can get, and it gives you the same ability to do the tab autofill, the IntelliSense like you see here. So as I'm typing, it's going to filter out those commands and get-net maybe IP. So you can see it start dropping down the number of commands based on what I've typed so far. You can simply select one. So as you get better at working with a system like that, you can actually get really quick at typing up your scripts. So it's got that same thing like we see in the PowerShell ISE. We also can launch a console down at the bottom. So I do have a terminal down here. I can do a get-net IP address or something like that. And not net, but get-net IP address. And I can see the results there. So just like with the ISE, I've got my script pane up top. I've got my terminal down below if I need to run a command right then and there. So I like that. The big advantage of using something like Visual Studio Code is the fact that it does more than just PowerShell, right? Like I said, if you're just doing PowerShell, the ISE is available. It's already installed. Might as well use that. If you work with a mixture of languages, something like Visual Studio Code, if I come down here and click on where it says PowerShell down here in the bottom right-hand corner, I can see all of the different languages that it supports currently. And this list has grown since I've installed Visual Studio Code. They're adding more and more modules for this. So you can see things like JSON and JavaScript, Markdown and PHP and Perl and Ruby. All those are in there. So if you find yourself writing scripts in more than one language, this is probably a better tool for you, or at least it's one tool to kind of do all of that in one place.
Although one big advantage of PowerShell ISE is that it's easy to execute commands right from inside of it. With Visual Studio Code, you'd really be executing outside of it, wouldn't you?
Well, you do have a terminal down here at the bottom where I can run live commands.
Oh.
Like net IP address. If I actually tab autofill. So you can, and that's what I was saying earlier. So it's very similar to the ISE as far as that goes.
Okay. Well, I know there are other tools that are out there. Several third-party companies make some as well. But you make a great point with ISE. It's free. It's
free,
there,
right? You've already paid for it anyway.
Visual Studio Code also free. Download it from Microsoft. It's actually based off of. It's an Electron app, right? It's like based off of Chromium or something.
I believe it was.
So there's the Atom editor that's out there, which is very similar. It's got a plugin for PowerShell. They've all got their pros and cons, but for you, at the end of the day, when you sit down and you've got to write something, it's ISE for you, right?
It really is, because this is my laptop that I use. But if I am in a virtual machine, I don't have I haven't downloaded, installed Visual Studio Code on there, right? And I know the ISE is going to be there, so that's typically what I end up using.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. Most of the time, we've got the luxury of writing a script on our own machine. But if you're in a pinch and you're on the server and you're trying to do it just from straight up PowerShell, then that's going to be a lot harder.
Yep.
All right. Well, Mike, I believe that is the last of our questions. I'm doing a quick double check here to make sure. But yeah, that was a pretty good run through there. A lot of good topics, a lot of things that are easy to get confused. And I do want to encourage everyone out there that each of the questions that we asked today came from viewers like you. This is my Sesame Street pitch. From viewers like you. If you have questions and you're looking for answers, please shoot them out to us. Jump on Twitter. Use hashtag Ask SME Anything. We've been focused on Windows Server this episode, but if you have questions outside of that, maybe you have a question about Microsoft Word, ask away, because Mike isn't the only subject matter expert that we have here. We've got ITIL, development, project management, Cisco, VMware. We have experts in all sorts of different fields. We just gather the questions together so that when we have the appropriate expert on, they get in and answer those questions and bring that information out to you. So it's a lot of fun. You get to participate in the process. I definitely encourage you to do that.
And thank you for not asking me any ITIL questions.
Yeah, I'll save those for later. So, hey, Mike, let's do some risk assessment. This will be great. So, all right, not all IT is fun. Speaking of fun, let me encourage any of you out there, if you are working on your A+ certification or really preparing for any cert, but specifically A+, we have a webinar coming up on the ITProTV site. If you jump over to go.itpro.tv/exam prep, there is a page that will give you information on that webinar. It was go.itpro.tv/exam prep. Or actually, I think it's a shorter URL, go.itpro.tv/A+. But if you check it out, Mr. Wes Bryan is going to be doing a webinar about what to expect when you go to take the exam, the types of questions that get asked, the format, and he's going to run through some sample questions that are not from the actual exam that he's made himself, but to show you the difficulty level of what you can expect and help you get comfortable with what that is going to look like. The webinar is absolutely free. Just jump over to go.itpro.tv/exam prep, sign up for the webinar, and watch that. If you can't make it live, don't sweat it. It will be recorded, and you can watch it afterwards. It's still useful information no matter when you watch it. Mike, I know you've taken a number of exams over the years. I have as well. Do you get test anxiety? Do you?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I still do to this day. And a resource like this would have been great to have before some of my exams to give you an idea of what to expect. Because I think that's what gives me the most is you just don't know what to expect. You're studying. Am I ready? How do I know until I see the exam?
I remember my first certification was A+, and I signed up for the exam, and it was 2 exams. I think it was $150 each or something. It was about $300, which for me at the time, this was forever ago. That was a lot of money, and I didn't want to fail because I didn't want to waste the money. I didn't feel pressure over the exam itself. It was more about losing money.
So it was. And it was the first time, for me, A+ was my first exam, and I had been in other fields for a couple of decades. And so this was the first test I had taken, I think, since college. And it was costing me a lot of money to take it. So yeah, I'm right there with you.
Did you pass it the first time around?
I did, luckily.
I had one of those nightmare experiences where I had A+ is 2 exams. Back then you had the hardware and software.
Yep.
And everybody said hardware was easier, software was harder, do hardware first. I booked them both on the same day, hardware first, software second. And a hurricane hit here in Florida, so we had to reschedule, and they messed up the schedule. so that I had software first instead of hardware. So I go into the testing center just ready for hardware, and I'm probably on question 10, wondering where are the hardware questions? I don't understand, and they were all mixed up. So anyhow, I did pass on the first try, so that was good. All right. Well, we're a little off track here with some of our questions, but I do just want to remind you guys, feel free to ask questions. It's what keeps this show going, and it's a great opportunity for us to reach out and help you get all the information you need. Mike, thanks for spending time with us here in the studio.
Oh, thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.
And for all of you out there in TV land, we'll see you on the next Ask Me Anything on ITProTV.
Are you enjoying Ask Me Anything? Then be sure to check out our other podcast, TechNado, where we take a look at the most interesting tech news stories from the week and interviews from people in the industry. Here's the latest episode, and here's the full playlist. And as always, be sure to subscribe to ITProTV's channel.
ITProTV.